What's going on, you guys? It's Dave, and today I want to go ahead and do another ranking video on a series that I feel like is well overdue for me to do a ranking from best to worst on, and that series is no other than Mortal Kombat. I've literally been playing Mortal Kombat my entire life. And I have played most of the titles. The only titles that I have not played are either the mobile titles or, the very weird games that came out, that flew very, very much under the radar. But I absolutely do 100% guarantee you that I do have the experience with this series or enough experience with this series to rank this accurately from best to worst. So without further ado, let's start the ranking. All right, you guys, so as you can see here, I've already went ahead and got the titles that I was mentioning earlier, the ones that, I never played because they were either on mobile or they just flew under the radar. And then I put Mortal Kombat Trilogy here in the mess section simply because I did play it, but it's literally just Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3, in one. So without further ado, let's just start the actual ranking of what we got. So now we have the actual original OG Mortal Kombat, the one that started it all. And I'm going to put this in the great tier because without this game, we wouldn't have the series that we have today. And a fun fact, in case you guys didn't know, Mortal Kombat is the entire reason why they brought the rating system onto video games. Usually games used to be rated kid through adult, but when Mortal Kombat came out, they actually had to establish the rating system. All right, so yeah, thank Mortal Kombat for that. All right, but I'm going to put Mortal Kombat 1 in the great tier because, when I first played it, as a child, it came out after I was born. I was born in 97. All right, I know Mortal Kombat came out before that. But, just playing the OG Mortal Kombat for the first time ever, I bought a plug and play from the dollar store, the Mortal Kombat plug and play that you can just plug into the red, yellow, and white cord in the front of your standard television. Yeah, I played that and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty cool for a, arcade pixel, style game. And yeah, there wasn't very much characters. There were only 8 characters in the video game, I believe, at that time, or 10. At this time, yeah, it was just a very, very basic roster. Yeah, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Liu Kang, the final boss, Shang Tsung, etc. So yeah, I'm gonna put that in the great tier. Just simply because of it being the title that started the entire series. All right, next we have Mortal Kombat 2. Once again, Mortal Kombat 2, they introduced Jax Briggs, and he's one of my favorite Mortal Kombat characters. He's really top 5 of all time. Some people say he's not that good of a character, but no, that guy, Jax Briggs is goated in my opinion. So I'm going to also put that in the great tier, because they just built on the foundation. And I don't really like to rank the games based on the lore of each game because although the lore was important, the lore, it varies, and then it doesn't really get that important until the later titles. All right, so Mortal Kombat 2's lore, it honestly, I don't remember exactly all the lore from it, but I just remember the roster. All right, so I'm going to put that in great because I did have fun with this. They did introduce more factors such as like babalities, friendships. Instead of executing your opponent, you can do like a friendship, or you could do like yeah, you can do stuff like that. Animal fatalities and things like that. That stuff used to be awesome. You could turn to a spirit animal and things like that and transform and execute your opponent. So that was a little fun Easter egg, and it was very innovative for that time. Next, we have Mortal Kombat 3. Now, Mortal Kombat 3, it expanded the roster even further. Introduced people like Nightwolf, who is, also one of my favorite Mortal Kombat characters. All right, so I'm actually gonna put this in the good section because although I have fun with these first two, number 3, it didn't really it didn't really just, it didn't really strike, any type of feeling in my heart, for it being like one of the best titles in the series. Because like I said, a lot when these came out, I wasn't born yet, or I was just born, and I really wasn't playing video games, obviously, so I didn't really get to experience this enough to where, I felt like it was going to be one of my favorites of all time. All right, next we have Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate. Now, Mortal Kombat 3 Ultimate is just basically, the enhanced version of Mortal Kombat 3. And it's like, they added just a couple of more characters, like Raiko, Shao Kahn's under general and stuff like that, and some other characters. So that was pretty cool. I believe they introduced Cabal in number 3 as well. All right. And now, yeah, I'm going to put that in just the good right next to it because it was just Mortal Kombat 3 with just extra characters. And I believe it was a couple other maps maybe. All right. Now we have Mortal Kombat 4. Now, Mortal Kombat 4 was the first 3D Mortal Kombat. All right. Most of the Mortal Kombats before Mortal Kombat 4 was actually just 2D. It was a 2D plane. You can only walk forwards or backwards. Well, Mortal Kombat 4, they finally made everything 3D. It was a 3D arena. You could walk around the entire arena, and yeah, the models were in full 3D. So that was a very, very nice step up because a lot of games were becoming 3D at this time. You had your Killer Instincts. You had just so many games that were coming out on PlayStation 1 and stuff like that were fighting games that were full 3D. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna put that in the great tier. All right, now we have Mortal Kombat Daily Alliance. Now, this was the very first Mortal Kombat that I ever owned. Okay, this was the very first Mortal Kombat I ever owned. My parents bought this for me alongside my very first original Xbox when I was 7 years old. All right, because I used to have GameCube, and although these titles did come out on GameCube before then, I just really didn't know much about Mortal Kombat besides Mortal Kombat 4 because I used to play that on the Dreamcast before I got my GameCube. But then I got a original Xbox, and Mortal Kombat was the very first Mortal Kombat title I ever owned. And this was my favorite because not only was it the first Mortal Kombat to come out on that gen of consoles, you can just tell, that Midway Studios and Ed Boon, they had just put in a lot of work to it. They added the crypt where you can earn money during fights and conquest, and you can go spend them at the crypt and unlock costumes and concept art and things of that nature. So that was very, very fun, just that fun extra content in the game. So yeah, I put that as flawless because Mortal Kombat Daily Alliance definitely does have a special place in my heart for sure. It solidified me as a fan in the Mortal Kombat series. And then, when they released more titles, I just became an even bigger and bigger fan. So Mortal Kombat Daily Alliance is definitely going in the flawless tier. All right, so next we have Mortal Kombat Deception. So now Mortal Kombat Deception, it introduced new characters like Ashura, characters that we now have in Mortal Kombat 1, and they reintroduced Nightwolf in Mortal Kombat Deception. And I'm putting this in the flawless simply because, the conquest mode was better. You play as Shujinko, the guy who can basically copy all moves. He's basically the taskmaster of the Mortal Kombat universe. And then, you had, other things like they introduced stage fatality. Well, they didn't introduce stage fatalities, but we hadn't seen stage fatalities since Mortal Kombat 4. All right. And, that was very, very fun to have. And, you could literally knock opponents into the next area of the map. So, that was just so fun to do. Like, I was obsessed with the stage fatalities, when they introduced them. So yeah, no, Mortal Kombat Deception is definitely going in the flawless tier because, I loved Mortal Kombat Daily Alliance, but when I first played Deception, I loved that even more. All right. So now we're going to Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, if you know, I've played this with countless friends growing up. I played this on my own countless times growing up. And you guys, the story mode and things like that, was just awesome. Each stage had a new boss, and they had their own unique fatalities and finishing cutscenes where, when you put in the combination that's on the screen the right time, or when you put it in correctly, yes, you will execute the boss in the boss battle. And it wasn't just a standard fatality. It would be its own special cutscene fatality. My favorite part in this game being when you fought Scorpion in Hell, and you have to do a fatality on him a couple of times. That was an awesome fight. So really, yeah, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, for what it was, for it to be, a co-op game, it was very, very fun to me. It was just very, very much enjoyable. It just broke outside of the, versus fighting style that it usually does, the one-on-one and stuff like that. Yeah, it was a very unique game. All right, next we have Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Now, Mortal Kombat Armageddon, I'm not going to lie, it was not flawless to me. They did have fun things in there though, like, motor combat. They had little mini games and stuff like chess, motor combat, where you can actually drive go-karts, and it was just like a Crash Bandicoot type of go-kart game that you could play in there. It was actually decently put together for it to be just extra in the game, extra game mode. And I love the conquest mode. You played as Taven, the son of Argus, and he's just running around. But, that their storyline didn't really do much for the entire franchise. They were there just to solidify, some other things in the later titles. All right. But yeah, Mortal Kombat Armageddon, it was fun. I love the fact that they had, basically the entire roster of all the Mortal Kombat characters ever introduced. They had Stryker, Natara, they just had so many different good characters in that game, but what drew me from the game, or what at least I didn't like, is that, as you all know, they had a fatality system, and they weren't personalized fatalities. The fatalities were the same for everyone. And I can understand why they did this, is because with so many characters in the game, I know they couldn't possibly have been able to fit all that data on the video game at that time and give all those characters, their own fatality. I believe there was like 60 characters probably on that game. It was a lot, and yeah, I understand that they couldn't give them all their own fatalities, but, that would have been extremely awesome. That's the only reason why this game does not get a flawless, in my opinion, okay? Next, we have Mortal Kombat versus DCU. All right, you guys, now, I was actually thinking about doing a let's play for this game on this channel here. All right, but I'm going to put this in the meh section because, I just feel like it was a lot of wasted potential. We thought it was going to be awesome. We get to see the murderous Mortal Kombat characters up against the heroic DC universes and the DC universe's villains as well. So I thought it was just going to be the blood fest that we never had, but it was, it sucked. You know what I mean? Like, and I mean that respectfully, it sucked. Even though I'm going to play it, eventually, just to see, is it as bad as we remember? But from what I remember, I was let down. You could do fatalities, but the characters would die off screen. And then the heroes had what was called heroic brutalities, where basically they would just do a move that looked absolutely no more brutal than the moves that you could already do in your special moves list. Okay. And the story was basically just, that there was a rage consuming people. All right. And it was just like a disease. It was just like a rage. It was basically like that episode of Dragon Ball Z where they had to release the mystic waters on Earth because everybody was falling victim to that rage disease. All right. And they had to go to Kami's Lookout, and Mr. Popo had to get the sacred water and stuff. So it's just like that. All right. But I'm going to put it in the meh section because overall, although I did play it, I did play it. I'm not going to lie. I definitely did. I owned it. So I played it, a little frequent. It still was not good. Okay. All right, next we have Mortal Kombat, the remake from 2011. Now, this was them rebooting the entire series. This was the first ever Mortal Kombat series reboot. And, it was produced by Warner Brothers Studios, so that would explain kind of the cartoon graphics that it had. All right, at this point, Midway, the company that originally developed Mortal Kombat, who made other things like, Rampage, Paperboy, Root Beer Tapper, they actually ended up going bankrupt. And they were bankrupt for a while before Warner Brothers picked up the series. All right. But the remake, it was fantastic. All right. They actually, for once, started including the fatalities in game. Like, you could actually go to the moves list and find your character's fatality. They didn't used to do that back in the day. Back in the day, you had to read Game Informer, or you had to go to a cheat code website, to find, to find out how to do fatalities. All right. So that was awesome. That they started including the fatalities in your move command list. All right. And they kept the crypt, which was awesome, but it used to make me mad though, because at the crypt, they would jump scare you and shit at the crypt. I used to hate that on Mortal Kombat 9. But yeah, the story was told great. A lot of characters have more of a major role. And I love to see it. I loved all the lore. I love the entire story of Mortal Kombat 9. So that's going in the Flawless Tour. Next, we have Mortal Kombat X. Now, Mortal Kombat X, it was, I'm kind of torn. I want to say it was great, but I'm not going to say it was. But, I'm just going to say it was good. Okay? I'm just going to say it was good, because, although I did like the fact that the characters were, the OG characters were getting older and they were trying to train, the youth, the future Mortal Kombat stars like, Cassie Cage, things like that, Jackie Briggs, etc. What I just didn't like is just how, the story, it didn't really make that much sense to me. You know what I mean? A lot of rivals became allies and vice versa. Scorpion became a villain all over again just so he could settle the score with Quan Chi, and he damaged his relationship with Earthrealm, like Sonya Blade and and Johnny Cage, just to settle a vendetta with Quan Chi. So, a lot of the things in the story didn't make sense. Now, what I did like about the game was that, all the DLC characters, like you could play as Jason Voorhees, which is, one of my best characters in that game. Me and my friends, we will play this religiously, online versus King of the Hill. And yeah, like it was a fun game for what it was. When it first came out in 2015, I was hyped. It was the first Mortal Kombat to come out on that gen of consoles like Xbox One, PS4. That was the first Mortal Kombat to come out on those consoles, and that was amazing, So yeah, and they had launched their new video game studio called NetherRealm Studios. So I guess Warner Brother, I guess they still own it, but I guess they're not the ones who, helped produce the game. But yeah, this was a fun experience for what it was. I just did not think it was great, and I definitely didn't think it was flawless. So I'm going to put Mortal Kombat X in the good tier. Mortal Kombat 11, now I'm going to also put this in the good tier because it does piggyback off of Mortal Kombat X's story, and they do add even more characters in Mortal Kombat 11. I really was not very much I wasn't really too stoked about Mortal Kombat 11 either. The story was just fine, and you can even, it even had a little bit of choices matter elements in Mortal Kombat 11. Like when you're playing the story mode, you can choose who you want to fight. You can make some choices in the game. That was awesome, but it just really wasn't anything like fresh besides some new characters. Liu Kang did become a fire god, so that was awesome. He was literally Raiden. He became Raiden, but the Fire God version. So that was awesome to see. All right, and then that paved the way for our final entry here, which is Mortal Kombat 1. Now, Mortal Kombat 1, not gonna lie, now this was great. Okay, they reintroduced another Mortal Kombat timeline, and Liu Kang, the people he once fought beside, he is now mentoring them. Like Raiden, he's mentoring Raiden and Kung Lao. And now Raiden and Kung Lao are now his students in this timeline. Johnny Cage gets reintroduced, his character personality, his drama and his Hollywood lifestyle affecting his marriage and his life. We get to see more of that stuff, and I love it because it's lore. It's accurate lore. I love that, and then it had its own conquest. And I love the conquest because there's a lot more content in this conquest mode in Mortal Kombat 1. So Mortal Kombat 1 was absolutely great, and we get to see some more characters we haven't seen in a while, like Tanya, Raiko, just characters I didn't really care for. They reintroduced, and I cared about them now. So Mortal Kombat, and then, we have more DLC characters like Peacemaker, John Cena's Peacemaker. They put him in the game. They put Omni-Man in the game and Homelander. Those are some very fun DLC characters to have. All right, so that is going to go in the great tier. Okay, you guys, so we have officially ranked all of the Mortal Kombat games from best to worst. And once again, you guys, as always, these rankings are just simply due to my opinion. I don't really like to get technical with the reasons why, because overall, at the end of the day, we play these games for fun. We play these for enjoyment, and that's what I like to rank them based on, how much fun I had, how much enjoyment it brought to me. I don't like to rank them based on the technical BS, like, oh, well, this game here, this sold more, or this game here had a bigger fan base, or, just the stuff that doesn't matter. What matters is, did you have fun with it or not? Okay, but let me know your guys' opinions on this. Once again, I'm always open to talk with you guys about why this game should be ranked over this one, or why this one shouldn't be ranked as high as it is. I'm always open to that conversation, you guys. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Once again, it's been your boy David, and I'm out. Peace.